Thank you. A lot of what I had prepared has come out already in many of the discussions and the case and the presentations which went before. So I'll skip some of it and dwell on specific issues. This is the problem, we all know it, that previous cannulations of any sort will lead to central venous stenosis. Very often the cannulations will be remote. Pacemaker wires, chemotherapy ports, long forgotten. Subclavian catheters, 40 to 50% risk, 10% with internal jugulars. Prior infections because of the septic thrombophlebitis that they excite will worsen the risk, and of course if the patient is a thrombophilic, then the risk goes up even higher. So as I said, port catheters, PICC lines, etc., and children even have PICC lines very often. These patients will have a central vein stenosis. Now the central vein stenosis is often remote. It occurs, collaterals develop, the patient stays asymptomatic. Then we create an AV fistula in this patient, and suddenly the venous return is increased, if it's a brachiocephalic fistula, by as much as 20% of the total venous return, and this patient begins to develop symptoms. The suggested mechanisms: trauma induced to the venous epithelium, secondary inflammation, the presence of a foreign body, the nature of which the catheter is composed. A more rigid catheter, silicone catheter, the preferred material is supposed to be today carbothane, the latest material, which excites the least reaction in the vein. Now this is what the applicability of this to India is. As per the 2012 CKD Registry of India data, 61% of CKD patients in India will be diagnosed at stage 5 and will undergo, most of them will undergo an emergency dialysis. So they will have rigid catheters, temporary catheters very often inserted, and there was an article in the Indian Journal of Nephrology stating that these catheters are more commonly used because the patients at presentation are unable to be shifted to a fluoroscopic area. They are in pulmonary edema, they have severe metabolic acidosis, they have hyperkalemia. They will go to critical care units, and interestingly, the Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine guidelines suggest that the preferred cannulation should be subclavian, and that's for two reasons that they state. One, it's associated with lower risk of central line infections in an ICU, and secondly, patients who are ventilated and have tracheostomies, the subclavian line is easier to manage than the internal jugular. But when this patient comes out of the ICU, and if this patient either in the present illness or in subsequent illnesses requires maintenance hemodialysis, the subclavian line, as we know, has a high risk. 40 to 50% of these patients will then get stenosis. The temporary catheters will be utilized until an AVF develops. Frequently, patients lose their permanent access and need another bridge, and for cost reasons and availability reasons, these patients will go back onto a temporary rigid catheter until a subsequent AV fistula is created, and often these patients will also have multiple episodes of infection, each of which increases the risk of damage to the venous endothelium and subsequently stenosis. The clinical signs, we know them: subclavian narrowing, edema or venous hypertension, especially if a fistula exists on the ipsilateral side. Innominate vein stenosis or occlusion, the face is included as well. The most dreaded of all is of course the superior vena cava syndrome, because in these situations it's associated with either superior vena cava stenosis or bilateral innominate vein narrowing or occlusion, and I have seen patients developing this after both internal jugulars and both subclavians have been cannulated for dialysis, and this has been more common in children who are getting hemodialysis. Okay, so this is a patient with a venous hypertension of an extremity on which an AV fistula exists, and for comparison, that's the opposite arm. So there's clearly a swelling on that arm, the venous hypertension. Venous hypertension will frequently mimic cellulitis in its nature: redness, warmth, and in some cases for two reasons. Either the skin gets so stretched that it begins to break and the the tissue edema fluid gets subsequently infected, and a true cellulitis is added on to the venous hypertension, and the other risk factor is frequent needle sticks of the fistula in a setting of venous hypertension. We have already heard that the duplex ultrasonography has a limited ability to look at the intrathoracic vessels. CT angiography is non-invasive, it's complete, but it needs intravenous contrast. What it enables, CT and MR venograms, enable us to visualize the entire venous tree, both internal jugulars, both innominates and the SVC in one sitting non-invasively. However, I recently had a patient who developed venous hypertension on the of the left arm 5 years after his transplant. His creatinine was 1.6, and I asked the scan department, how much radio contrast will you give this patient to image his complete vascular tree? And they said 70 to 80 ml. Now this patient got away using a femoral approach with 1/3 of that amount, including an angioplasty. So this is what the ultrasound should show. There should be complementary colors for the artery and vein, and if there is a stenosis, the flow gets reversed, and the Doppler in this situation will show the same color because the blood in the internal jugular is flowing in the same direction as the carotid, and so their complementary colors will not be seen. What are the treatment options for these patients? The conventional are balloon angioplasties, the bare metal stents, the stent graft has come in, and surgical bypass. I would look at 3 terms which have been coined by NAVAX. Technical success is the restoration of flow without significant residual stenosis or a significant decrease in the pressure gradient. Primary patency is the time interval from the first procedure to the first re-intervention. Assisted primary patency from the initial procedure till permanent occlusion or necessary stent placement, and in the case of stent till permanent occlusion of the stent. This is what K-Doki tells us, that the preferred treatment for central vein stenosis is PTA, percutaneous angioplasty. However, the K-Doki guidelines came out before the experience with stents improved, and definitely before the rescue study which looked at the covered stent graft and which was published last year. Should we treat every single lesion? Now this is a study, an interesting study, 35 patients with 86 central venous stenosis, all of whom were asymptomatic but had access dysfunction. 24 of them were left untreated, and the remaining 62 lesions were treated, and follow-up venograms were analyzed in all these patients, or in about half of these patients. Of the 24 who were left untreated, 12 had follow-up venograms, and the lesions were seen to have improved in 4 without treatment, were stable in 4, and had progressed in 4 with no complications or occlusions. Now, of the group which had treatment, 36 of these had follow-up venograms, 3 had improved at the follow-up, but 23 of the lesions had progressed, indicating that the damage induced by the procedure itself probably triggered off a further intimal hyperplasia, and these patients were the ones, 4 of them developed additional stenosis, 4 of them required stents, and 1 had arm swelling. The covered stent graft has become available, and there are studies. To summarize, this is what I found in the literature in a systematic analysis. 9 studies on angioplasty, about 465 patients, 90% technical success, 6-month primary patency about 57% and assisted 84. Bare metal stents nearly the same, 10 studies. The covered stent graft, much higher primary patencies, 100% technical success, and slightly higher assisted patency. And of course, this was before the rescue study which was published last year. The rescue study randomized 265 patients to either angioplasty or the Bard's Fluency stent plus stent graft, which is a nitinol covered EPTFA graft. The study, if it had 235 patients, would have an 85% power to detect a difference. All these patients had a mandatory angiogram at 90 days in an independent cath lab to assess their results. When I looked at, well, the fluency stent graft has about 5 times the 6-month patency and about 3 times the 90% freedom. But what is quite surprising about this study is the 6-month patency is dismal in the angioplasty group. It's much lower than that in previous published studies. It's 3% as opposed to the fluency plus, which is about 17%. And so is the 90% freedom from restenosis is barely 25%. When I went through the literature, I found only one study from India which was published in the Indian Journal of Radiology in 2007, and it's a small study. It's from the PGI Chandigarh. 11 patients undergoing 18 interventions. The indications were arm swelling, decreased flow on dialysis, prolonged bleeding. All underwent prior CT angiography. The mean volume of contrast used, and these were all dialysis patients, was about 60 ml. 11 patients. 2 of them, there were technical failures with an endovascular treatment. 9 of them received it successfully. In 2 of them, angioplasty alone was done and both developed restenosis. In 7 of them, angioplasty with a stenting was done. There were 2 deaths, so the follow-up was not possible. 3 of them underwent restenosis and only 2 had successful at follow-up patent stents and successful dialysis. The mean time was about 2.5 years. The mean age was 46 years. The cephalic approach was used in 3 and a combined femoral and cephalic approach in 6, and stenting for residual stenosis in 7 patients. This was the distribution of the patients. The lesions were the left brachiocephalic vein was the most commonly involved in about 40% of the patients, and the commonest length, the length of the stenotic segment varied between 1 and 3 centimeters and 3 to 5 centimeters in roughly an equal number of patients. There were 5 complications: local extravasation in 2 of the patients, failure to dilate in 1, edge stenosis in 1, in-stent stenosis in 1, and a stent fracture in 1. Last of all, I'd like to show some of our own KEM data. In the last 6 years, 111 patients have undergone 121 angiograms. 34 of these patients were diabetic. The mean time to a patient needing an angiogram has been about 9.5 months after starting dialysis. These were the distribution of the axes. 68 were radiocephalic, 3 were transposed basilic, 29 were brachiocephalic, and 11 were saphenous vein grafts. The commonest site was the needling segment in about 60%, 55% of our patients, followed by central venous stenosis in 11% of the patients. So a total of about 17, and 25 fistulas had more than 1 lesion. Now this is a patient who had high venous pressures. The venous pressures would go up to about 400 and she would have prolonged bleeding after dialysis, and it's tempting to think that the cause is that lesion in the brachiocephalic fistula vein. But if I look, there is a cephalic arch stenosis, and when I follow up all the way to the central vein, even the subclavian has a 50% stenosis. This is a subclavian vein stenosis in a patient who presented with a lot of arm swelling. This is a total occlusion in which I struggled for about an hour and a half, could not cross it. This patient's right internal jugular and right brachiocephalic also had chronic occlusion, and eventually we abandoned trying to use and gave her a cuff tunnel catheter from the left femoral, which has lasted about 14 months. This is a lesion which was referred, which I uncovered incidentally. This patient was referred for placement of a cuff tunnel catheter. There is an about 40% stenosis in the right brachiocephalic because I injected a contrast. I did not touch this lesion since the guide wire as well as the cuff tunnel catheter passed easily, and the presence of the cuff tunnel catheter is probably keeping this vein patent at present. And this patient has gone on for about 12 months on the cuff tunnel catheter. This is from one of our own patients. There is a lesion of the right brachiocephalic vein. There are collaterals which can be seen, and this patient was developing progressive arm swelling, and eventually he agreed to an intervention when it was becoming difficult to stick his AV fistula, which was a brachiocephalic fistula. We could cross it fairly easily, and this is the result after dilatation with a 14 mm balloon. That is his arm initially, and the pictures below show this, the result 48 hours after the intervention. This is a cephalic arch stenosis in a patient who presented who was dialyzing elsewhere and who came to us when his fistula, stenosis had raised the pressure to such an extent that his fistula was augmenting, but there was no thrill on it, only a pulsation. And this was crossed. This balloon needed to be raised to about 20 to 22 atmospheres. At 16 to 18 atmospheres, this is the state of the waist. After that, it did open up. This is a patient who came to me. He had a brachiocephalic AV fistula, but this was the state of his arm, so this was not used, and he had dialyzed himself through temporary femoral catheters for 4 months, and he came to us in staphylococcal bacteremia, which necessitated antibiotic treatment, removal of the femoral catheters, and this was the lesion. This has reinforced my liking for taking the antegrade approach. It's possible to puncture a fistula vein which cannot be seen or felt with the help of ultrasound, and the brachiocephalic vein had been reduced to a thread, but it was very easily crossed by even a 12 mm balloon opened very easily in this, and this was the subsequent result. At 7 months, this patient has an arm that looks like this. This is the patient I spoke about. There is a subclavian stenosis. I went retrograde. There is no fistula functioning in the arm, and this is what happened to the guide wire. Even after an hour, the guide wire, even with an 80 centimeter sheath in the superior vena cava, the guide wire persistently went up the left external jugular. But fortunately, when parked there, a balloon could go across the stenotic segment and open, and this patient improved. So our data totally stands at around 17 patients. We had stenotic lesions in 11, thrombotic occlusions in complete occlusions in 6. We attempted angioplasty in 14. In 11 it was successful. In the others, in the other 3 it was not. And 3 patients opted for alternative site access. We went in for surgical correction in 3. The surgical correction has been the use of a reinforced graft to the opposite side. In 1 patient it was axillary. In 2 patients it has been from the axillary vein on one side to the internal jugular of the opposite side across the chest wall. And this data looks good, but it is censored by a heavy loss to follow up of many of the patients. This is a complication which has stuck in my mind for all times. I was using a guiding catheter to attempt to cross a very tight subclavian stenosis, and suddenly the tip of the guiding catheter broke. And as you can see in the image on the right side, it sailed away, fortunately came to rest on the guide wire about a few centimeters distally, and my cardiology colleague showed me this. We passed a 2 mm balloon over the guide wire, hooked the catheter by inflating the balloon, and then pulled it back and removed it. This has been alluded to by Dr. Sachdeva. I have to say I have no personal experience with these techniques at all. To conclude, central vein stenosis is a complication of catheter use, and especially the rigid catheters which we use a lot. The left brachiocephalic vein is the frequent site of stenosis. Asymptomatic lesions are brought to light by the creation of an AV fistula. The covered stent graft is showing in the rescue study shows very good results, but we need more studies. 2 conclusions which I haven't listed here, but which came to my mind as I listened to the discussions over this morning. There is much more experience from India than the published literature suggests. We need to be more analytical, we need to look at our results, and we need to publish them. And what was brought out by 2 questions during previous discussions, we need to look at cost and consider when to give up and when to look for alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lobo, for the masterly presentation. And you have very well shown that in 61% of the cases who are diagnosed as CKD, they present for the first time
For dialysis.
in ESRD and requiring dialysis through a catheter. But what about the remaining 40% patients who gradually progress to ESRD? Are we able to make timely AV fistula in these cases?
We don't have that data from the registry.
The non-creation of timely vascular access is the leading cause of central venous stenosis. Till we achieve that ideal situation, the patients have to live with this necessary evil. So the non-referral, not referring the patient in time to the nephrologist. The nephrologist doesn't have time to educate the patient about the mode of dialysis therapy and timely vascular access, or the patient is not able to accept this fact that dialysis is imminent. So this is a largely preventable condition, and we should all work to timely creation of the vascular access.
Thank you. I think this is very
open
important.
for discussion now.
Because we don't unfortunately have that data. The registry report says 61% of patients presented for the first time. We don't know what proportion of patients actually start dialysis with a working AV fistula. That data is not there from India as yet.
In the series you have shown 2007, that is from PGI.
PGI.
Chandigarh. That is the Dr. A.K. Agarwal.
Dr. Yadav and
Yes.
Yeah.
And in where the only seven cases were there. In your
Yeah.
case, it is 11 cases were there.
11 total
So I
cases.
wanted to know that what is the percentage of this preventable, what out of total on hemodialysis, what is the percentage of occult one, symptomatic, what percentage you found? What was the percentage of the
No.
total occlusion?
All my patients were symptomatic.
All your patients were 17?
Symptomatic. They wouldn't. I haven't done angiograms for asymptomatic patients.
So all your 17 cases were symptomatic?
Yes.
Okay. So it is the requirement that the vascular mapping or the early AV fistula, I mean that should have been
Yeah. I mean, some of these patients whom I have done, we drain a very large area. So when there is a vascular access problem and they are referred, that's when we've been doing angiograms.
Do you frequently do vascular mapping in your center? Before I mean at the
No,
before?
no, not as a routine.
Oh.
No.
Do
But
you recommend?
We do it whenever there is a history of a previous line, if the patient can give us that.
That you are talking about asymptomatic patients.
Asymptomatic patients with a history of previous lines, even central lines,
And you are talking about occult stenosis.
stenosis.
Do you, for all the stenosis in which you intervene, do you suggest angioplasty with a stent or only an angioplasty? Is there any cutoffs if you have 1 centimeter stenosis vis-a-vis a 3 centimeter stenosis? So whenever you intervene, the rescue study that you showed us,
Yeah.
so whenever
The rescue study just randomized patients.
No, what I would like to know is that any stenosis where you have to intervene, you think the best is to intervene with an angioplasty with a stent or just do a balloon angioplasty?
That's if you see the restenosis rates are very high, and I think that was mentioned even by some of the previous speakers, if angioplasty alone has been done. Now there are recommendations that in those situations when the restenosis occurs, you plasty it again. But if our patients cannot undergo those frequent procedures, perhaps a stent will increase the patency rates. Having said that, we've heard about in-stent stenosis, we've heard about stent thrombosis. There was the excellent case which Dr. Sachdeva showed us of 2 stents in that patient, and both of them were occluded.
So my only concern is that, see, when we use a stent, you're going to use an antiplatelet agent.
Yeah.
So in our patients who are more prone for bleeding, does the complication rate go up in this?
No,
So,
no.
Okay.
In fact, there are studies which have shown there was in fact, even immediately after creation of an AV fistula, they gave dipyridamole and aspirin. It didn't improve the end result of patency, but it reduced the rates of fistula thrombosis in the first 3 months. So I don't think aspirin and clopidogrel is unsafe in our patients.
Mr. Chairman, we have totally run out of time for the discussion.
We just have question. Yes.
It's open for discussion for the House.
Hello, sir. Myself Dimple, and I am working as fistula coordinator in renal transplant department in PGI. A minute before, sir said that we need more and more patients to be enrolled in it, and they need to be guided to get in the touch of the nephrologist. And we in India setup, we don't have so many of nephrologists, and we need the nurses and the paramedicals who are actually to be taught and to be given the training and to be given that faith that they can work very well. And in this way, I would like, and I'm very glad that I'm over here, and I would like everyone to motivate more of the paramedics and the nurses to come up with the training period time. They are to be taught very well, and in that way we can, like I am working now as fistula coordinator in renal transplant. More and more patients, they are coming to me and they are very happy that I am able to tell them everything. And we have not taught about the diet over here. more and more patients, nephro patients, they are more worried about what to eat
Yes,
and what
your
not
question,
to
please.
eat.
Oh, it's all right.
Dr. Lopo, you mentioned that most of the patients, when they have a catheter and then get a thrombophlebitis, also predisposes to infections.
Right.
So
It
we are also seeing
predisposes to stenosis.
stenosis and then thrombosis also sometimes.
Yes.
So when you are removing the catheter for a short duration, 3 for 7 days, whether it can give a low molecular weight heparin, whether we can reduce the chances of thrombosis and stenosis.
I don't know the answer to that. I didn't come across any study which has used prophylactic low molecular weight. I think if there isn't, there hasn't been an episode of infection, then certainly not. Otherwise, it's anybody's guess.
Just a quick comment and a question.
Dr. Sachdeva.
The stents that we are we using bare metal stents?
I have only used bare metal.
Now, the bare metal stents have not been shown to have
Yeah.
any difference
Agreed.
at all.
Yeah.
And
I
there's
showed
been a
that
lot
in
of
the studies.
randomized trial.
Yeah.
There is some data that using covered stents,
Stents.
and namely wire band
Yeah,
covered
I did show
stents.
that.
Right.
Yeah,
So
wire band.
if you have to use it, I would use a wire band.
Absolutely.
And it may be that it will
Yeah.
decrease the risk. of
Yeah,
infection.
Mr. Chairman, we have totally run out of time for the discussion on this paper.
Any
And
more questions? Then, gentlemen, let us close it.
thank you.